Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We have a very special guest joining us today. It's Bob Clearmountain. It's great to have you here.
Nice to be here.
You've been here to Sweetwater a number of times,
Couple
right?
of times, yeah.
Yeah. We just have never had a chance to sit down and do a video with you, so I'm glad we had time today.
Yeah, me too.
So you're out on behalf of Apogee.
That's right.
And you guys have a big thing going in the Sweetwater studios today.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what's happening.
Well, we've actually written a song called about Sweetwater.
Oh, nice.
I think it's called Give Me Some of That Sweetwater. So that's how the chorus is anyway. Not sure the actual title.
Right.
And we've used some of your musicians, your drummer Nick, and let's see, Don, the guitar player.
Right.
And the bass player is
Dave?
Dave, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, who are very good. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just been just a total pleasure.
Nice.
Working with them. We had a little track. The song's basically written by our friend Ron Feemster, who's also known as Nephew. He's an R&B producer. He's worked with Michael Jackson and Train, Dr. Dre, a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, he's got a pretty impressive credit list.
Yeah, he really does. And he's just a great guy. He's like Mr. Energy. He's fantastic. Right. You know, he just kind of inspires everybody to do great things.
Right, nice.
And he's a brilliant musician on his own. One of the most incredible organ players I've ever come across on Hammond.
Nice.
And so it's going pretty well.
Good. So the idea is that you're recording this song in Studio A at Sweetwater.
Right.
And then tomorrow, the sales engineers will be coming in and be talking about the process of how you recorded it and of course, the Apogee gear that you used to do that.
Well, this is the thing. We're recording everything through two Symphony IOs that have, each one has 8 mic pre's, has an 8 mic pre card. And so we've used, it's all the drums, the bass, the guitar, and the piano, I believe, are all going through the Apogee preamps, and they're working perfectly. I mean, it's just, and not only that, but Apogee's introducing a Dante card. So those two systems are connected via Dante to another Apogee in the machine room that's on the Pro Tools, on your Pro Tools rig. Okay. On the Sweetwater Pro Tools rig. And so it's Dante, which is a new thing for us, but it's working out really well.
Nice.
And eventually there'll be an Apogee control, so you can control the mic pre's from the control room. Okay. They're not quite have that finished yet, but it will be done the next few weeks.
Right, which makes for a great solution for recording on location, but also in the studio. Exactly. When you don't have to go out in the room. So yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, you know, once you're into a Dante network, you can connect lots of other pieces of gear from all kinds of other manufacturers. Right. So it all interfaces seamlessly.
Right. Very cool. Yeah. I'm excited to. I'm going to drop by tomorrow and check the whole thing out. I think it's going to be exciting to see.
Yeah, and it's just sounding great. I mean, the mic pre's are. I mean, people don't realize. People think of Apogee as a digital company, but their mic pre's. Years ago, they made a thing called a mini MP, which is just a stereo mic pre, and there's no digital on it at all. And it's my favorite mic preamp that I've ever used.
Nice.
And there's a guy there at Apogee named Lucas Vandermee who does he's the analog guy, and he designs all the analog front ends and back ends to all the converters. And he's just hits it out of the park every time. I mean, it sounds so good. Right. He's also done we have this little USB microphone that we're on the 3rd or 4th version of it now. And they call it the Mic Plus, and now they've just come out with a new version that actually has an analog compressor built into the front end of it, totally analog before the digital conversion, and after the preamp, and it just sounds fantastic. It's got 3 settings on it. In fact, our friend Nephew was the main inspiration for it, because he said, boy, it'd be so great if you could do a microphone with built-in compression so that people could just plug USB into their computer, and without having to put any plugins or anything in, it would already have that compression, which is the sound that everybody hears on hit records every day. Right,
yeah. Isn't there a video on the Apogee site where he did a whole song with that microphone? It sounded incredible.
Yeah,
nice.
We've done a few videos with it.
Nice.
And we recorded Peter Erskine, who was a famous jazz drummer, just with that one mic, just sitting over his drums. It just sounds incredible. Yeah. Even on the bass drum, and the mic is like back here.
Right. Nice. Nice.
Yeah, it's really
So
good.
you were telling me before before the video started rolling that this is the first time you've done any tracking in a while. You mainly
Yeah,
been
I
mixing.
usually don't. I mean, we do radio shows for the local radio station in Los Angeles, KCRW, and that's about as close as I get most of the time.
Right.
And occasionally I'll record some friends or something like that, but most of the time I'm just mixing.
Right.
And I mix all analog.
Uh-huh. So do you enjoy getting back to the tracking side of it occasionally?
I do. Yeah, it's fun. It really is fun.
Yeah.
You know, actually getting in on the ground floor and having some say about actually what gets recorded.
Right, right. So does that change your perspective when you're actually tracking the session? Do you think about it in terms of when you're going to mix it at the end? Does that change your perspective of how you're tracking things?
I absolutely do. But it's interesting because there's something that happens, because I used to produce records. I produced about 25 or 30 albums. And it was always frustrating mixing things that I produced myself because it's the can't see the forest for the trees kind of thing, you know, where I wanted to mix it. And there was a Bryan Adams mix. I forgot what song it was, but it was on, I forgot what album it was on. But I just remember this one song that I must have mixed it 6 times because I couldn't hear it. And still, to this day, when I hear it, there were things, oh man, I missed that.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't quite get it right as far
Right.
as everybody else thinks it's fine, I'm sure, but.
Right, right.
know.
Just because you're so close to it, it's hard to step back.
It's too close to it.
So when you start a mix like that, whether you've tracked it or not, do you pull everything down to 0 and start from there? Do you start from a rough mix, or how do you get rolling on a mix?
I pretty much start from kind of a rough mix. I'll just push all the faders up, and it's usually something that I haven't heard before. And so I'm familiarizing myself with what's there. And so I'll go through, I'll put a rough mix real quick, and then solo things to hear what each instrument does. And I think of the instruments as sort of characters in a play or a movie or something. So I want to know what the contribution of each thing is and where they come in and what sort of color they're adding to the overall thing. And then I'll just kind of mix it. Once I know what everything's doing, I'll just get a feel for what should be there, what shouldn't be there. Sometimes I have to take things out.
Right.
Sometimes I'll actually add something that isn't there or do an edit, things like that. Usually, most of the stuff I do it's like Springsteen or the Stones, where you don't mess with their
Not a whole lot,
arrangement too
right?
much. The Stones pretty much did the same songs that I was listening to when I was a kid.
Right.
So there isn't much to do.
Right, right.
Maybe fix a mistake here and there on the live stuff, but
Yeah.
but yeah. So that's it until eventually I get something that sounds like a mix. It sounds like a balance, and it usually happens pretty quickly. And then I'll start putting it into the automation. And I usually start with writing the vocal. That's to me, that's always the most important thing, is the voice. I'll work on the effects on the voice, whatever, or no effects, or whatever it should, the type of environment that it needs, which is where all this stuff that I do that's going to be in this plugin that I've done, where that comes into play. But and then once I've done that, I kind of just listen to it basically, and what does it need now?
Right.
And I keep going through it and touching things up in the automation. SSL automation is great. Unfortunately, I don't make it anymore, but nobody does. But it's so easy just to grab a fader and add a change, and then that didn't work quite right, and I could just get rid of that and do it again, and it's a very natural process.
Do you do all that, the processing, say, for example, on the vocals as the centerpiece, do you do that in isolation, or do you do it within the context of all the faders being out?
Well, a little both. Mostly with everything in. And in fact, I always have the vocals in pretty much. As I'm working on the drums or the guitars or the keyboards, the vocals are always in. Maybe they're down a little bit, but for some reason, I always need to hear the song. It really throws me because I'll work with producers sometimes. I say, take everything out. Let's just listen to the drums. Okay, we'll listen to the drums for 20 minutes. all right, I have no idea. I'm completely
Right.
lost because where's the song? That's not the song. That's just the drums.
Mhm.
Let me hear what everybody else is doing, even if it's the wrong balance, just to get a feel for what the entire record is,
Right.
and especially the vocals.
Mhm.
That's important to me. I mean, somebody told me that they were working with Ringo Starr one time, and okay, Ringo, what do you want in your headphones? So he was playing drums. He said, well, just give me the vocals.
Hmm.
That's all he wanted to hear was the vocals, and he's playing drums.
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess, like you said, that gives him the song. It tells him where he's at.
Right. I mean, I'm not that extreme. But it's a little different situation when you're mixing, obviously.
Right. Right. So you mentioned that you spend time getting the rides right on the vocal using the automation. Are you doing that in place of compression, or are you compressing first, or how does that factor into it?
It's part of it. Well, I try to get the sound first. I would compress it first if I'm doing any compression or EQ.
Mhm.
I try to do that first. But it doesn't mean that I don't change it later. I might
Sure.
even change compressors because I'll either have an LA3A on the vocal, and then I might go, well, it needs a bit more punch to it, and so I'll stick it in an 1176,
Right.
you know, or whatever, or something else.
Right.
But yeah, I might change it. But usually I try to get all that sorted out before I even get into the automation.
Right.
You know, the kind of balance should live on its own without messing with it.
Mm-hmm. And then you're just touching it with the automation to bring
Yeah.
things in and out and to get the dynamics that you want.
Right. Of course, it depends on the recording too, because not all recordings are the same, and the approach changes depending on what the track, how it's recorded, and what the track is.
Right.
You know.
Right.
What the song's doing.
Sure. Speaking of live recordings and the Stones, I was looking back over your career, and one of the most incredible things you've done has to be the live concert video you did with Martin Scorsese.
Ah, right.
Where you
The
did
Stones
how many
shit.
different mixes of where you were matching the film, and then you were doing the DVD,
man.
and then the stereo mix and things. Tell us a little bit about that process when you're thinking about working to picture.
Mm-hmm.
How does that differ from if you're mixing, say, for just a stereo audio release?
Well, I mean, I do probably more than half of what I do are concert videos.
Mm-hmm.
That was a little unusual because it was Martin Scorsese directing it, and he's an interesting character.
Yeah.
Because you know he edits the film, and he wants the mix to reflect his edits basically.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll say, okay, if I see a shot of a close-up shot of Keith, I want to hear Keith. You know, if it's a shot of Mick, I want to hear Mick.
Mm-hmm.
And so the balance, if you really listen to the movie soundtrack, not the live album because that was a different mix altogether, but the movie itself, and you don't watch the film, it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because the panning's changing all the time, depending on who's front and center, and things are jumping out.
Right.
You know, and so it's. But I don't get that radical. To me, that I didn't really think that was right. I mean, I
Right.
hate to disagree with Marty,
Right.
but I kind of works in the way he edits it. I think it worked
Mm-hmm.
for what it is. But
Mhm.
I wouldn't normally do that. You know, I mean, I might move, say, a guitar solo. All of a sudden, you have a close-up of the guitar player. I might move that to the center.
Mm-hmm.
And things like that, and then bring it up a little bit and feature things that you see. And then sometimes some of these live videos, I'm mixing from a line cut, so I'm not mixing from a final edit. So I have to be really careful about what I push because it might be ridiculous once I get what the editor might not have featured that one thing that I'm pushing.
Right.
You know, because I'm looking in a line cut and they showed the keyboard player, and my tendency, oh, let me push that, but can't really.
Right.
So it just depends on the editing schedule, really, as to how the mix goes,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
Right. Do you then say, okay, we've done that, and now we're going to do the audio-only mix? Do you go back and say, okay, I've got to undo all this stuff, or do you do a separate mix for the audio release?
Usually it's the same.
Okay.
For concert videos, I just did one for Toto, I did one for the Doobie Brothers, and it's all the same. And one for Steve Van Zandt last year, and a couple other things too that I don't remember what they were, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they were In fact, there really usually isn't time to go back and do another mix. But most of those, I don't do anything particularly radical. And the rides that I do where I will push something up, it'll be a solo, it'll be some featured part anyway.
Right.
And hopefully the video directors, the video editor has picked up on the same, the same little featured things as I'm pushing.
Right.
And usually it works out pretty well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I wondered with all of the live recordings that you've worked with is there can be a lot of bleed in live recordings. So what do you do when you have the kick drum and it's an equally loud bass guitar and lead guitar in the kick drum track?
Well, not so much. It's really the way things are done on stage nowadays, especially now that a lot of bands use in-ear monitoring. Usually the stage is actually pretty quiet.
Yeah.
And so the isolation isn't much of a problem. And the bleed that's there, if anything, is helpful. It makes it just sound a little liver. I mean, in the old days, I did mix a Stones gig from a club, the Marquee Room in London from 1971. It's on 8-track, and that was rough because obviously the sax players were standing right in front of Mick Taylor's guitar amp.
Right.
And so pushing the sax and all I'm getting is his guitar. And so that can be, the older recordings can be rougher, especially that was all an 8-track, and there wasn't even any audience tracks on it. And so I had to take the audience from one of our radio shows and flew it in there to make that work. Yeah.
Right.
And but the more recent ones, it's amazing how it's usually between the monitor guys and the front of house guys. Everything's mic'd pretty tightly nowadays, and so it's more like mixing a studio recording with audience tracks.
Okay.
That's the big thing about is recording the audience properly, I think, for live recordings nowadays. Right.
Do they typically use the same microphones for front of house as you get for the recording, or do they mic it up seperally?
No, it's all the same. It's
all
just
the
a
same?
split. Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Unless I'm there and I might replace something, I might, let's use a different bass drum, and I'll just add another bass drum mic or something,
Right.
Occasionally, but usually not. Usually whatever they use works pretty well.
Right. Right. That's fascinating. So you might think I didn't catch it, but you dropped a hint there that you have a plug-in coming out as well. We should circle back and talk about that. Tell us what you're doing.
Well, it's interesting because I mix in the analog world. I mean, everything comes from digital and goes back to digital, but I have an old SSL 4K, and I do a lot of things with delays and reverbs, and that I've just kind of techniques I've developed over the years, and it gets to be quite complicated. In the analog world, it's easy because I'll send something into a delay, and then the delay will go into maybe a couple different reverbs, and then go into a harmonizer. Let's say I'll EQ it in certain ways depending on the track, and then the delays might either feed into themselves for a spin, like a regen spin, or they'll feed into each other. They'll cross feed, so you get like a ping pong effect. And there's all these different types of things like that. And I tried to do it in the box one time. I tried, what if somebody wanted to do something like that? And it's really hard to do digitally. And so I thought maybe a plug-in that could simulate that. And then my assistant, Sergio Ruelas, who's working with me for the last 5 or 6 years, he sits behind me and he sees what I'm doing, and he actually brought it up. He said, there ought to be a plug-in that can do that because it's a cool sound. It really an enhancement. It isn't like an intense effect, It isn't kind of the thing that this is going to jump out in your face. It's just this kind of subtle environment. It's like an environment, and so I've called it Clearmountain's domain. So I thought the word domain sounded kind of fun.
Yeah, right.
And that's kind of what it is. It's like this domain where the mix lives, and it's great, like on a guitar. You just want a guitar to kind of have this tail on it, that spreads to the stereo. And so it'll have a bunch of presets. I'll work on a whole bunch of presets, but you can get under the hood. The main page will just be more and less, basically. More spin, less spin, more level, and then there'll be other pages where you can actually get under the hood, and all the parameters will be available. So if somebody really wants to be a geek, they can get in there and they can create their own. And I actually would encourage people to do that because, okay, you can use one of my presets. That's fine, and that's going to be really easy to do. You just click on it. But I always encourage people, like, don't do what I do. Come up with your own thing. Right. And then save your own preset. And if it's really good, send it to us, and maybe we'll include it eventually in the one of the presets that you get with the system. I think that would be a good thing.
Very, very cool.
And there's just going to be a ton of different. There's like a thing called blur, which is almost like a distortion. So kind of like an effect going off the walls of an arena or a concert hall, where the sound is a bit different coming back. You'll be able to EQ it. You'll be able to do different things with it. Send it into a reverb.
Right. Right. Nice. And so is this coming from Apogee then?
It'll be coming from Apogee.
Right. And when can we look for that?
Hopefully in a month, maybe.
Okay.
I think if we can finish it, we're right. We have it. It's all working. We're just working on graphics basically at the moment.
Yeah.
That's what seems to be the hard part, is making it look nice and not too complicated and just complicated enough.
Right. Right. Well, that's awesome. I can't wait to check it out. That's very cool.
Great. Well, we hope everybody likes it, and
Yeah, I think it's gonna be great.
Yeah, I think it'll be a nice little thing for people to use.
Right, right. So just a couple more questions for you. One that always comes up when I'm talking with someone like yourself who's done so many amazing mixes and has such a track record
Thank
is,
you.
when you listen to other mixes, what are the mistakes that you hear people making?
Well, I do hear what I think are mistakes, but they're not necessarily mistakes, because mixing is so subjective that what's wrong to me is like amazing to somebody else. And so there'd just be things. One of my little pet peeves is hearing a really dry rhythm track, and then you hear vocals that have like a ton of reverb or effects on them. And I always imagine, okay, what is the space that I'm hearing? And okay, so the vocals are in the Grand Canyon, and the rhythm track is in this tight little bedroom, or a recording studio. And to me, that it's just a funny balance. And I don't I would do it if a producer look, you have to do it this way. This is what I hear. Okay, well, that's what you got. We'll try to make the best of that.
Right, right.
But that's just one of the things that I hear, and sometimes too much or too little de-essing. I'm kind of a freak about de-essing. Yeah. And in fact, part of this plugin there's de-essers built into the plugin. And that's one of the things that sometimes when it's too much bass drum, kind of annoys me a little bit. Of course, that annoys me at a lot of live shows for some reason. Right. One of the things I find the front of house guys tend to favor the bass drum more than I would. Let me put it that way. I'm not saying it's wrong. Right. I'm just saying that's something that I guess people like bass drum more than I do sometimes. Right. I really care about the bass drum, and so I'm very careful about the way it sounds and the way it blends with the rest of the track. But I think there's a place for it. Sure, it's easy to overdo. Yeah, so that's a couple of things. Right. Yeah, I can always tell on a lot of times if I'll turn the volume knob down, all that's left is the bass drum. Yeah. When you're finished, and it's always kind of funny to me. Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So my last question for you is: you've worked with so many amazing artists through the years. Springsteen, and you mentioned Bryan Adams and the Rolling Stones, and the list is just incredible. What is it that makes them great artists? They pay me? No, yeah. just kidding. Well, it's the songs, really. It's a combination of songwriting, which I'm a big fan of great songwriting, because I can't do it. Right. I've written 2 songs and they were both pathetic, and so I'm always marvel at great songwriters, which is why I love Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bryan Adams is a great songwriter. The Stones are amazing songwriters.
Sure.
You know, how many incredible songs did they write? That's the one thing. And then getting the song across, even if it's not your own song, just like I'm a big fan of the Motown records, and people like the Four Tops and the Temptations and the Supremes, and the way they didn't even write their own songs,
right.
But it sounds like they did. It sounds like, you know, when you hear a Four Tops song, it sounds like Levi, the lead singer, it sounds like he wrote it because it sounds like his song, and that kind of thing. I mean, Bruce, of course, they are his songs, and who better to
right.
put across? Somebody like Bob Dylan, who I've never actually worked with, but people don't think of him as a great singer. But if you really listen to his songs, one of the things about him is that you get what his song, you get the vibe of his song from the way he's singing it. You know, there's a connection. A great singer will make a connection to the audience,
mm-hmm.
and I think that's the thing that really thrills me about so many of the people that I'm lucky enough to work with.
Right. Yeah, I love that. The focus on the song is really what it's all about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bob, thanks so much for sitting down with us today. We appreciate you taking time. I know it's been a busy day with all the setup and the recording and everything that you're doing today. That's great.
Really fun day.
We're glad to have you here at Sweetwater.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for this.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you. And thank you for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.